Good morning, and um, I'm Ryan Huffman. I will go ahead and introduce each other real quick, I suppose. I'm going to get things started. I'm Ryan Huffman, but I'll let Emily and Ruth introduce themselves as well.
I'm Ruth Monier, she, hers, Learning Outreach Librarian at Pittsburgh State University.
Hi, I'm Emily Finch, and she, hers, and I'm the Scholarly Communication and Copyright Librarian at Kansas State University.
Okay, so back to me, and I apologize. I'm Ryan Huffman at Pittsburgh State University. I am an associate professor in the Graphics and Imaging Technologies Department. So today we're going to talk to you about Creative Commons licensing. First thing, go ahead and go next. First thing we always like to talk about whenever we talk about Creative Commons in any way, shape, or form, or intellectual property rights, is that this information in the presentation is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. If you have specific legal questions, please contact your Office of General Counsel or consult with a legal professional. So at all times, please remember that this is for informational purposes, not legal advice from us. Next, please. Some of the things we're going to talk about today would be what is Creative Commons, give you a little bit of a background, how copyright and Creative Commons work together, Creative Commons licenses and the public domain. We're going to cover those kind of separately, but then tie them back together. Creative Commons licenses in practice, so we can give you some practical examples, and then go over some myths and frequently asked questions. And then we'll leave a session at the end where we can answer some of your questions that you might have. Next. So first things first, what is Creative Commons? Next. This seems like a pretty straightforward, easy question, right? Well, it is. The answer has a couple of different facets though. So Creative Commons is built on legal tools, right? So the whole idea of Creative Commons is that we're trying to, take a look at copyright and how difficult copyright is to kind of understand and all the gray areas there. And Creative Commons can kind of work to make copyright and intellectual property rights a little bit easier to understand. But first, we've got to have a strong basis of legal tools. So that's built on the legal aspect so that Creative Commons is very strong legally. It's been held up in case law. So that's got to be the first step. But it's also a nonprofit organization. They help to overcome legal obstacles to the sharing of knowledge and creativity to address pressing challenges in the world, which brings us to the fact that it's a global network. And it's a global network in this idea that we have people all over the world that are a part of this network, because we know that the laws and the customs in one country are going to be very different from another country. So this global network kind of comes together to help everyone understand how those things are different and how we can come together with a common good. And because of that, it's also a movement where we're continually trying to promote this idea of sharing content and being able to use and reuse content. So it's really inspired by people's willingness to share their creativity and knowledge, and it's enabled by a set of those open copyright licenses. Next. So this is something that we kind of wanted to share with everyone. Again, Brenda had talked about the fact that this presentation is going to be recorded and it's going to be available to you. So I would tell you to either take a screenshot right now and to get the web address down at the bottom, or come back to this recorded presentation to be able to go to this website where we're posting this PDF. And this PDF, it's got two sides. I'm only showing you one of them here. And if you print it off, it folds up into a small brochure that you can just fit into your breast pocket, into your back pocket, and easily take it with you. And it's going to have really kind of the basics of Creative Commons. It's going to have, some information about the licenses, some FAQs and myths, and some information about fair use. So this was created to kind of be a quick go-to guide. And the way that I've personally used it at my university is anytime I give like a presentation like this to my faculty or staff, I print these off and I take them and I hand them out. So I know that someone has a quick reference right to some of the basic information, at least about Creative Commons. So this is licensed under a CC BY license. So you can use it, you can print it off, change it around if you want to, turn it a different color, whatever you want to do. You don't have to print it off at all, though. You could just use the digital version of it and share it with some of your colleagues to have an easy way to access some of the information that we're going to talk about today. Next. So let's talk about the specific CC licenses. So I'm going to start off, this is a little misleading. I'm going to start off at the least restrictive. Not totally the least restrictive though. Okay, Emily is actually going to talk about the least restrictive licenses, but let's omit public domain for right now, because we're going to talk about that later. And we're going to start kind of at the basic CC license of CC BY, also known as the attribution license. So you can see the mark that we've used here, the icon that can be used, or you can just use the CC BY text there that you see. And what the CC BY license allows people to do is basically a lot. It allows them to distribute, remix, adapt, build upon that original material in any medium or format. The only catch is that you need to give attribution. So perfect example is that brochure that I just showed you. Myself and a student of mine created that. We license it under a CC BY license, and therefore I'm basically giving all of you and anyone that finds that the right to, you know, download it and change it if they want to, remixing it, adapt it to your specific needs. So if you want to pull out some information, put in some new information that, you know, needs to be updated, something like that, you can do it as long as you just give me and my student as the original author's attribution. The next license is a CC BY SA. The SA stands for share alike. And when we're talking about share alike, CC BY SA has the same rules as CC BY. In fact, everything we talk about from here on out, besides public domain, is going to have that initial attribution factor built into it. Okay, so you're always going to have to give attribution for these next licenses we talk to. But an SA license, share alike, says if you do use someone's work that has this license and you change something about it, the new creation that you have created has got to be licensed with the CC BY SA license. So the whole idea behind a share alike license is that we share, we continue to promote the culture of sharing. We want people to use our work and then share it, and then use it again, and then share it. And if they change it, share it again. Next. So the next license that we'll talk about here is an NC, a CC BY NC. NC is non-commercial. So once again, you can remix it, distribute it, adapt it, but it cannot be used for commercial purposes, and attribution still needs to be given. So the CC BY NC just cannot be used for commercial purposes. Right next to that, the same type of relationship as the previous licenses we talked about, a CC BY NC-SA says you can remix it and adapt it and distribute it, but not for commercial purposes. And if you use that work that's been licensed under this license and you change anything about it, you've got to license it under an identical term. So NC-SA, once again, to again promote sharing across all mediums. Next. And then finally, the last two licenses we'll talk about for right now would be the CC BY ND, and that is the no derivatives license. So here, instead of being able to remix it and adapt it, you can basically copy and distribute that material. So you cannot make certain changes to it, to that, whatever it is that you're using that's someone else's work. Now notice that this version, just the CC BY ND, can be used commercially though. Okay, you just cannot change it. If you want to restrict, and have someone not use it commercially and not allow any derivatives, that would be our last license, the CC by NCND. Non-commercial, no derivatives. So this is the most restrictive CC license, but compared to copyright, it's still not as restrictive as full copyright, because at least with this, when we put that stamp on our work, we're basically saying, hey, it can be used, but under these very strict terms, basically. But with copyright, you've got to be able to contact someone to be able to use it. There's a lot more hoops to jump through to be able to use something that has a full copyright, has the full copyright protection, and doesn't have these steps built into it with CC. Next. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruth to talk about copyright and Creative Commons.
Thanks, Ryan. Emily, if you can go ahead and go to the next. Thank you. So copyright, as Ryan alluded to, is pretty strict. And so just so we all are working with the same definition, and please note we're going to be referring to US copyright throughout this presentation and not other countries because it does vary by country. So just as a refresher on what copyright is, it's a type of intellectual property that protects original works of authorship as soon as the author fixes a work in a tangible form of expression. So just because you have an idea, that's not copyright. It's got to be written or put down in some place so that it can be tangible. So here in the US, the copyright is given once it is in a tangible form to that author for the lifespan of that author plus 70 years after their passing or their estate. So it can be a little longer depending. If you want to see full copyright, there's the link from the US government's website to do so. So for example, this presentation, let's say this was a solo presentation, it was mine only, and I didn't put it under a Creative Commons license. And let's say maybe I die when I'm 80. If this were the case, this presentation would not be able to be out of my copyright or my estate's copyright until the year 2142. That's a significantly long time. And so if somebody wanted to use it, they would have to contact me or my estate if I was passed to get permission for access. So that really kind of holds down all those things to the author and having that sort of level there. So copyright reserves all the permissions to the authors. Creative Commons is it builds upon that copyright. So it's a layer on top. And it says you don't necessarily need to contact the author or the creator every time, as long as you're following the rules that they have set out. If you follow these rules and you're using good faith and good intentions, they're not coming after you. They're not hiring lawyers to do it. And so that's kind of the thing. I do want to point out there are some exemptions to this, like fair use. If you want to hear more about that, go to the 10 a.m. session at the summit that talks about it, or watch it later. So be aware of that. So again, Creative Commons is taking down some of these walls. I like ice cream. And so I have an ice cream analogy, even though it might be a little colder today than normal. And I just think it helps. So if we're going to go and look at this photo and we're going to work through how ice cream and ice cream sundaes relate to copyright and Creative Commons. So the first thing, the work is the tangible bowl or container that's going to hold your ice cream, right? So it's tangible. We can physically have the item. So that's our work. Copyright is immediately given. So to have ice cream sundae, you have to have ice cream. So the copyright is the ice cream. It is immediately on your bowl. So this is your ice cream with your bowl. You're ready to start your sundae. Each of the toppings are parts of the CC license. So maybe you have a nut allergy. And so you don't want it to have nuts, or you don't want it to work on that. And that could be maybe a non-commercial. You don't want people to make profit off of it. It might be a non-derivative. You don't want people to make changes. This is the sundae, the best. This is the only way you should have an ice cream sundae. And so it may not be all the flavors, but you kind of pick and choose what is that sundae. And that's those Creative Commons licenses on top. So regardless, everybody has copyright and everybody at least gets an ice cream in a bowl if you have a work. But what you're allowing other people then to do or build upon is your toppings. So hopefully that helps a little bit with Creative Commons. And Emily, if you can go ahead and go to the next. So thank you, Emily. So just a reminder that copyright does include, you have all the author's permission, but it includes all of these items. So reproduction rights, derivatives, so changes and adaptations, performance rights, transmission rights, distribution, and how it is displayed are all within the reminder of a copyright. So when we say author's permission, all of those are covered as well. And I am now going to turn it over to Emily.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Creative Commons in the public domain, as Ryan mentioned earlier. And so just kind of looking at where all this overlaps, the kind of options authors can take when they are using Creative Commons licenses. So you can, again, you have a work, you have that ice cream. You and that bundle of the 6 rights that make up a copyright, you can, ride those through to the public domain, your life plus 70. And this life plus 70 line is red and bolded because this is permanent. So regardless of what happens to the work, it is that life plus 70 or the appropriate terms for whoever maintains that transfer plus 70. With a Creative Commons license, and I just use an NC up here for example. I'm sorry, I'm trying to clear off my screen from the admin notes. You're basically drafting an agreement. Well, you are drafting an agreement. You're agreeing to a license. That license, you, the licensor, the world, the licensee here, and you are gifting them permissions to whatever the terms of your agreement. So that is to make those copies, to distribute, to create derivatives, to display. You're moving to a some rights reserve model, and that's different from copyright, our single C here, which is an all rights reserve model. All rights reserved means literally you maintain that bundle of rights, where that some rights reserve model means you are transferring, you're licensing some of those rights away, you're not transferring. Again, these are public licenses, Creative Commons licenses. There's a couple other forms of public licenses. A traditional non-public license might be a transfer away or have its own set terms that aren't quite so publicly visible. But at the end of the day, it is all that life plus 70. So that some rights reserve model ends after the life of the copyright holder, which you still are, plus 70. And then kind of the last tool, and I'll get into a little bit public domain mark and public or CC0. The kind of most open option that exists in the Creative Commons framework is this newer CC0 license, where you as the copyright holder can say, I don't want to hold on to this bundle. I don't want to license under these terms and some rights. I literally just want to designate it straight to the public domain. And that would be a transfer. You are abandoning your rights to the public domain. So the thing about Creative Commons that's important to remember is there isn't a day because you're sharing that worldwide. You are not able to track its use once I save and redesign, if that's within the terms of agreement, very easily at an individual level. And this is where you get copy trolls. You can't say, ignore that. I want all my rights back. I want to get rid of that gift and move some rights reserved to all rights reserved. No. And so when you are putting Creative Commons licenses on things, it's a very easy process. It's an encouraged process, but think about the utility of that work and what you want from it. Because yes, legally it gets very bad here. And so you saw here, this is the CC0 license, which is different from the public domain mark, which is another kind of newer product out of Creative Commons advocacy. And what I want to emphasize here is with these two very eerily similar marks here, well, logos here. One is a mark. There's the public domain mark with that little crossed out C. There's no copyright. That public domain mark used to indicate that the material resides in the public domain and tells users how they can use it. There's no restrictions. It's in the public domain. As your friendly neighborhood Scholar Common copyright librarian, I'll say always cite your works and provide stable links because provenance in research matters. And yeah, sure, Michelangelo won't be alive to benefit from scholarly credit there, but it's the best thing to do for future users and to distinguish the other works that are being cited and compiled in your work. The CC0 license is just that. It is a license, and you are licensing that work. You're waiving all the rights. The item is going directly to the public domain. And again, you are telling users how they can use that content. And that said, the difference here being when you're putting this on something, it's just to let people know that it's in the public domain. When you're putting on your work this in something, you have to have copyright. The item needs to be copyrightable at the beginning, so that original, tangible, fixed, and fixed and tangible meaning original and creative, sorry. And you're putting this license on it and you are moving it there. So they are different, very frequently confused. The public domain mark is slowly being adapted by more and more cultural institutions to help showcase their collections as friendly and usable. But just remember, one, there isn't copyright that exists in it anymore, and the other one, someone relinquished their copyright. So a little bit about Creative Commons licenses just in practice, bringing this back to OER and why we are here today specifically. Some tools I recommend that, and want to just go over a little bit because I think that they highlight the use of Creative Commons and open licensing in OER really well. The O in OER is making sure that you're understanding, again, using kind of those that bundle of rights and what you're allowed to do, and what your expectations are. I think this is a helpful chart. Whereas you see with copyright, you do not have permissions to do any of those above. But gradually, again, showing how, some of the most open, optimal licenses will allow all of this and tell people how they're allowed to do it. Whereas, as you see, some of them more restrictive, this entire little bundle is less open to allow reuse. Another great chart, again, with some caveats. This is a great chart when building your OER. It's one of the most used. It's one I link to all my authors. That said, it isn't perfectly clear. With Creative Commons licenses, you're often thinking about one-way compatibility and two-way compatibility. And for the most part, it's very clear that there isn't compatibility in some places, and most of these green check marks will mean in some way, shape, or form one or two-way compatibility. The biggest kind of one-way compatibility we're looking at would be between share-like components. So with that share-like term, and by one-way and two-way compatibility, mean one-way compatibility is you take something with one license and you adapt it. You can license it under a second type of license. With two-way compatibility, interchangeable. With this, if I start with a BY item and I make a derivative, I can license, this is the one way, my work under an SA license and have it be used with share-like terms. What I can't do is start with a share-like and label that work with just an attribution requirement. And that is a little confusing in how these are all lining up, but I want to make that clear. So for an example, and I want you to imagine an engaging in-person world where this is more of a discussion, and hypotheticals really roll over well when it's not just me talking. But looking at one of our OER using a popular OER platform, I'd ask you and we'd talk, what can we do with this book? And my little gotcha moment would be everyone's looking at this Creative Commons attribution and they'd say, oh, well, I need to provide attribution to Dr. Morberg and I can use this. My little fun trick question is be careful to look at the license in the terms as you use material. Yes, the item is licensed under this, the compilation of resources here, and the author's work is under that Creative Commons attribution, just a CC BY. That said, there can be, because we're looking at OER, we're looking at adoption, adaption, building on these compendiums of work, reusing. There can be instances, and it's encouraged, I just label them properly, to go ahead and mix resources that are openly licensed. And so this except where otherwise noted is a really important clause. And so what Dr. Morberg does in this item is indicate whether what they're linking to is a permalink to library content that your institution may not have, which is going to be a commercial license, not an open license. What is openly licensed, what is a government work and therefore resides without ownership and in the public domain. So the license here applies to the item as a whole and not the items, every individual item. And I'm just checking the chat because I see that. What are the consequences for not putting any type of CC license on things such as online lectures? I'm going to save that for the end, but that's a good question. Yes, so license. And just what that looks like, because I think this is a really great example of OER and navigating intellectual property, is rather than, which would be infringing, take documents from or chapters from books, scan and compile, could have a fair use claim, but you're getting risky. Dr. Morberg and his team put together an annotated bibliography with permalinks. Yes, that's another great question, and relates a lot to some of that copyleft trolling you saw earlier in the chat. We'll get to versioning too, and it's been bubbling up lately, especially. But yes, back to this. Using these permalinks to content, K-State users would have access to this because we've subscribed. If it's a government website, everyone would have access. But using it this way to get around some of the concerns so that other schools could adopt and adapt, and purchase just that article or access to that resource. But the material is still there and curated for it to be optimally useful. So going back to that essay license, and is that allowed? This is probably the number one question I get in frustration with open licensing. And so it is not wildly clear and available on their website. So I did the digging for you for Creative Commons kind of official discussions on share alike licenses. And so you could read all of that, but what you'll note here is they do not require the collection, the compilation itself to be made available under SA. Each work that is licensed under SA that is modified, that individual work must be licensed under the same term. So if one of your chapters is shared SA and you modify that chapter must be shared SA, but it can be in your CC BY licensed compilation. A little bit as I continue just to, plug licensing and making sure you're using licensing to the best of its ability, kind of the kind of go-to way to make sure that you are providing the most friendly attribution and notation of that license, including that term and the versioning, but also the most user-friendly. So if users using a work can understand what is the author of the compilation or your OER, and where there's other intellectual property rights vested in the object, is this TASL framework, where you are providing the title of the author, the source, and the license. Hyperlinking is encouraged and great because it really allows for some solid provenance that's quick and easy. But I actually encourage my authors to use the same framework with their images when they are publishing, so that their rights are very clear and laid out, juxtaposed with others' rights. Quick, I'll get into this. It is important to make sure you're doing your best, especially to link to the terms of the license and that you are including the versioning. The current version is 4. That's the one I'd recommend using and being the most familiar with. The terms change ever so slightly, and so we are getting that versioning. There have been some recent issues and trends noted with some of the older licenses and the language they used bubbling up lately, especially in regards to violation of public licenses. I won't get into that because it's wildly complex. Feel free to email me and we can talk about that. But including that version, because they change ever so slightly, is important. That said, if you see a 2.0, you're using it under the terms of 2.0, which is why it's important to link. You're not applying a 4.0 framework to a 2.0 licensed object. Speaking of adding Creative Commons, and I saw in the chat, someone linked to a great resource for picking and choosing. Creative Commons has a native, pretty easy to use share your work feature that'll walk you through, just ask you the basic questions to understand how you'd like the work to be used and what tools they have to ensure that it's used under those conditions. And just to be helpful, I put a shameless link to the downloads of the actual SVG and PNG files of the licenses, which aren't incredibly easy to find on the website. And so rather than, I have authors screenshot what they find and put that in to grab the actual higher quality file. That's just a quick, easy link to that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth to talk over some Creative Commons misconceptions.
Thanks, Emily. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide, thanks. Well, I'm going to go over this rather quickly to make sure we have plenty of time for the questions in the chat. The first kind of misconception is that quality CC licensed work is poor quality. And this is not true. There is individuals who really believe in open movement, who are writing textbooks and who are full professors at universities. Are there items that might be a lower quality? Yes, you got to look and see who the author is and be aware of that. I mean, it's the same thing with a photo. Like I can take a photo on a crappy old cell phone and it's not going to be as high quality as maybe a photo that Ryan takes with one of his very nice cameras. So again, being aware of who's behind it and looking at it for your purpose. So if sixth graders open license, maybe not going to be great for your purposes as somebody who is a professor, a full professor at a university who's done a lot of research on a topic. But there is high quality OER out there, and there's a lot of it out there compared to when the OER movement was maybe just starting. Number 2, that Creative Commons license trumps copyright law. As we talked about earlier with ice cream, it is a layer on top. It does not trump. They are both used in case law. They are both important, and it builds upon the legal framework. CC licenses build upon the copyright legal framework. Emily was mentioning there's no way to locate the original author. And with Tassel and following those attribution links, you can find the original author. It's really important that there's citations with the CC BY, and so you can figure out who was the original author and where it started. Licenses cannot be overlapped. Emily did a great example of talking to us about share alike and how CC BY and share alike license can work together. And that is true. They can work together. It just depends on the licensing and what's going on with the work. So that can happen. Creators or authors cannot make money off of CC license work. As Ryan mentioned earlier, there is a non-commercial, but you are still the owner of that work, and you still can make, as the original author or creator, could make money off of that work. You could have published printed materials with the CC licensed work. There are quite a few more books and editions out there these days that are originally CC licensed, but now they have a printed copy and they're still under that license. Just people like having things in their hand. And so that is available. And you might even see at your college bookstore, there might be a CC licensed work that is printed format for those who prefer a paper and give their eyes a break from the screen. I do want to point out, depending on what you're doing, just like we all know, sometimes royalty checks aren't big for what you're doing, but you still can potentially make a little bit of money. And then that also leads into CC licenses are only for digital works. I just talked about you can have a physical copy and do that as well. So if you're printing materials or having any of those editions. So those are just some common things that might run up against. And I'm going to turn it over for Emily for next slide and questions. The first question that was in the chat was, what are the consequences for not putting any type of CC license on things such as online lectures, for example?
It's a good question, and definitely for me, it's penalties. And if your intent is public, and I'm sorry, my monitor's popped over to the other one. If your intent is public use, and then the use of that object, are you doing yourself a disservice? Because what you're hopefully getting are people who care and understand about authors' rights and the creativity and originality of your work and want to use it. You might get some people who are uncomfortable relying on any of the exemptions under copyright law for their use. So you might lose out there. Of course, when you share anything, my favorite question from students, and it's a great question, is, well, if it's on Google Images, isn't it in the public domain? If it's on the web, isn't it public domain? And it's like the buzzer goes off in my head. No. So there's that misconception. And so if you aren't clearly licensing your work, you also at the same end are risking the misuse or misinterpretation of the intent of use of that work. And that's why it's a very weird double-edged sword. Being as clear as you can with how you want that work used, using a Creative Commons license, or a right statement. Rightstatement.org has some great right statements, or just indicating that you want all rights reserved, is really the best way. And it's not common practice. It's just not been built, I don't think, well into how we're thinking in a digital world. Copyright is both so future forward thinking and so in the past, but there's a lot of issues when those collide, and this is one of them, is that we aren't trained to think about everything that we post online and its use. And you'll see that with people running into that lovely non-exclusive worldwide license you give Facebook and Instagram whenever you do share an image. So intentionality really does matter. That said, I know I see a lot of hesitancy to label things such as online lectures. because of university intellectual property terms. That is something to look into, given your status at the university and your rank, considering your university's intellectual property rules and guidelines and the ownership of that work, if it is indeed your scholarship, or if because of the terms of your job or a formal work for hire agreement, that belongs to the university. So with that, you are needing to be careful. If the university is the owner of that work, you would need to talk to the appropriate channels to license it under the license that they would like on that work versus you assuming copyright, which is copy fraud. But yes, the unhelpful but hopefully helpful answer to that.
All right. I don't have anything to add to that. Ryan doesn't look like. Okay, so next question. You alluded to this. What do the license numbers mean? This was a 4.0, something previously said 2.0. I feel like, Emily, you covered that pretty well, but just to recapture to make sure it's all in one spot. The different versions of the
I
2.0.
don't know if anyone else wants to jump in with me.
No,
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah, I just figured you'd recap because you just did it pretty well.
Yeah, and I will link to the kind of troll article, since this seems like a good crowd for that, who might find that entertaining. Yes, it really just comes down to the versioning and the really nitpicky language. And the article I'm linking really hits on that for the first 5,000 words, which you can scroll through fast, which is just like, what do you need to do this well to be a copyright troll, is really understand and nitpick the law. It just comes down to terms of use, and the kind of biggest current area of contention is under previous language. If you misused the work, like you ignored the non-derivatives component, the license basically was that, yes, you've infringed on their copyright, which is intrinsically true. But the way that has changed language wise has opened up this place for copy trolls to go ahead and try and reclaim their work. Other kind of copy troll activity, there is, without getting too into copyright, section 203 of Title 17, that's copyright law, which is the ability to cancel your transfers of, well, your licenses. The issue with that is if you're canceling a license you've made with a publisher, for example, you know the terms of that license, it's not a public license, it's going to be a custom license. You are in that process. With that public license, the distribution of that work becomes unruly and unmanageable. But you get people relying on that 203 if they follow it to the T, and it's a wildly complex, wildly time-limited statute where there's 10 years to initiate and 5 years to act on, in a very tiny window that bubbles up. So and people say that it's an issue with public licenses. It's not an issue with public license, it's the nature of copyright law. And that's what we're hitting on today, is that there isn't one on top of the other, in a sense that one supersedes. They are working together using the same fundamental basis of US copyright law, which is also why Creative Commons are one of the most enduring and long-term and continuously growing and affecting the market public licenses that you'll see out there. So I'm going to find that piece, but yes, the versioning is important. Use it under the terms it's provided. And when you are reusing something, that's why linking to those terms and pulling up the terms, that 2.0 version, which means the next user knows it's 2.0 and they're familiar with those terms. Because as much as I nerd out about this, I don't have the exact differences in each versioning mapped out to a T. So that's why that's really the best practice.
And I would just summarize what Emily all said beautifully as technology has evolved and not understanding has evolved and usage has evolved, so have the Creative Commons licenses. And so that's why the numbers are increasing. Okay, I see. Brenda, are we still good to keep going on questions?
You should be able to, yes.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to a newer question at the bottom. How long does it take to get a CC license? Is there a wait process or is it instant? If someone changes a SA license and adapts it, where do they share their updated version? So a CC license, I'm going to start for the first one, give Emily a break. To get a CC license, you apply it to your work. So you're not necessarily filling out copyright. You don't have to run down to the government office down in DC. You apply it initially onto your work live. So it's once you've determined your license, you apply it and then it is there in an instant. If someone changes an SA license and adapts it, where do they share their updated version. I'm not sure what your intent is with this question. Are you saying the original author or somebody was changing another person's license? Brian, Emily, do you have any guesses?
If it's talking about, back, and again, I don't even know the timelines on these, if I'm being honest, perfectly to a T. If you'd started with a 2.0 and that's how you shared that work, and now you're like, whoa, there's these issues with these terms, let's move to a 4.0. Because these are worldwide non-exclusive licenses, if you wanted to republish with that formal 4.0 license, yes, because you are the copyright holder. Again, you can apply that to someone else's without derivative work according to their own framework. And that's what copy fraud is here, is if you're taking someone else's, by the way, that's what I mean when I say that, if you're taking someone else's OER and you've changed nothing, you've done nothing to it and you're just putting your name on it, copy fraud. Copyright is still there. To get a Creative Commons license, the work needs to be copyrightable. Yes, but you could, there's no automatic transfer from 2.0 to 3.0 to 4.0. And that's why being intentional about linking is there. There isn't that progression. If you republish your work under a 4.0, you're not republishing the work itself with no changes. So your copyright term wouldn't adjust at all. But that version of it, sure, could follow those 4.0 terms. The issue comes with dissemination. That 2.0 version still exists out there somewhere on something, and that person's use of it under that 2.0 license isn't invalidated when you recently republish with a 4.0. If people find the 4.0 version and they use it accordingly, yes. But it doesn't, there isn't a transfer update process that exists for that 2.0 to 4.0 conversion, to my knowledge. I think that was the question, maybe.
That was an
That
earlier
was
question.
An earlier question.
So definitely answered one of those questions.
So I think what
Go ahead.
Laurel was asking, and put it down here as well, wondering if there's a specific platform you're supposed to share the updated work. No, there's not. If you use someone's SA work and you make a change to it and then you relicense it, under that same term, under the same terms, then you just need to tag it on whatever platform you share it on. So like I'm a photographer, so I share work on Flickr a lot because Flickr has a really great Creative Commons platform built in. Then I would share it there on that specific platform. So it really just matters where your work is going to go, Pressbooks, Flickr, wherever, that type of thing.
Glad we could help you. I have another question that came in to me. When students are using a documentation guide like MLA or APA, and they have an image in a PowerPoint or essay, how do you reconcile using the document style with the giving the license credit? It's a really great question.
Yes, and it's what librarians live for. It's like, yes, thinking about those citation standards. What I recommend is the license is not, no, it's not part of your Friendly Neighborhood Chicago APA MLAs. But the title and author certainly are, and the source is. So are using the T, A, and the S, very easy to do, and hyperlinking out, absolutely. Is it, for your formal bibliography, are you going to put the license in a footnote at the end? Probably not, but you have a little bit more leeway with those styles in that captioning. And so best practice using those, and then adding the license to there as part of the caption. Just like if you best practice use something from special collections or an archive. Yes, there's a format for, APA Chicago MLA for citations, but typically publications are a little bit less worried about captions than they are your footnotes and your bibliography. And so hyperlinking out at those levels as best as possible to map DASL, excellent. Including really robust captioning that does include this, also excellent. And I really do see it as a great way that, again, even I as a student and person writing papers wasn't thinking, CC license your own work within there. And I get a lot of students, especially grad students, worried about copyright because of this whole, but I'm using someone else's work, but I need this to illustrate a point, and it is a really great way where, yes, in the same journal article you are writing and you are using someone else's image and you've made a derivative totally legally according to those terms, the ability then to see your image juxtaposed with their image is going to help with an infringement claim, because you're being very intentional about what is your original intellectual property, and what, as a scholar, you are citing and respecting another's intellectual property. And I'm glad you asked about images, because images are inherently just more tricky with copyright. And I'm sure Ryan can attest to that. It's just different than text. And part of it really hinges on that the lack of a moral rights framework in the United States. Ours is very economic rights based. It is economic rights based, that bundle. But because of that, the creativity really matters in US copyright infringement cases. And the creativity of an image in our brains inherently rests differently than the creativity over text. And also, again, with text, that line between factual and non-factual gets really tricky too. Your non-fiction writing is inherently factual. So what part of that is protected? It certainly is protected, but at a different component than a novel. So yes, creativity and originality plays a role in it. It's complicated.
I was gonna say, I know that we're running a lot of time, but I had just one question. I don't know if you have the answer for this, but I know somebody mentioned TikTok in some of the questions, and it was basically saying something about, are the moves copyrighted in TikTok? And they actually added a link to an article about that. I get some moves from some dancers that are being stolen. So anybody has any comments or on that?
So that, that plays into choreography. But I don't know. I wouldn't be able to answer it directly. No, I would have to think about that one for a little bit. It ties into choreography, but it also ties into like where it originated and tying it back, figuring out where it originated. Because I know that a lot of those TikTok dances are, some people make them up on the fly and then they just boom, explode. So that's an interesting question that that's what's interesting about copyright though, and how the law itself doesn't really tie in very well to technology of today and how quickly it advances.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I also am not familiar with TikTok's copyright policy, like how much they have take power. Just like when you use certain platforms, they have a lot of power by posting in certain places. You give up things by using where people are at. So I'm not sure about that. Also, that level, that could be another level into that on their move as well.
I
Yeah.
just did the quick link to Circular 52, which is going to go over copyrightability of choreography, it is more difficult. For a long time, it really was literally like those foot maps where you place your feet where what's submitted to indicate choreography. Again, that digital world is a blessing and a curse. So what does that look like? Although most of the legal you'll see around TikTok, which I'm really interested to read that article closer, is going to be the sync license related to the music behind that video, behind the interpretation, which I only bring up again to nail in that creative protection and the moral rights that we use that to represent, because we don't have that moral rights framework. The issue in copyright typically with choreography there would be yes, the independent choreography of the artist doing the dancing, but then the compilation with music and the audiovisual recording. So there's typically layers there. So many layers that choreography, this is the first time I've seen that be the issue that comes to the forefront. Normally it's record labels upset with music, and fortunately fair use is our friend, and we're working towards that. And I do think TikTok, now that it's been purchased, has some of the similar PRO frameworks as Facebook and YouTube, but a good question that I'm excited to dig into.
Well, thank you so much. I think those were some of the questions that were there in the chat, and you answered, all of them. And thanks for people of sharing their some of the resources on the chat. Definitely take a look at the links that were shared. We really enjoy your presentation. We learned so much with about this topic. Thank you everyone for attending this session. I hope to see you in the rest of the day in the other sessions. Thank you so much, and thank you for attending this thing. Thank you. We learned